A $500,000 home in Cape Coral, Florida, just sold for $390. The seller walked away with nothing. Worse, they had to bring 40 grand in cash just to close the deal. 2 years ago, that same house sold in 48 hours with 12 competing bids, all cash, sight unseen. Today, it sat empty for 4 months while the owner watched their retirement fund evaporate into the Florida humidity. Cape Coral was the poster child of America's pandemic property gold rush. Prices exploded 75% in just 2 years. Remote workers from New York and Chicago flooded in, waiving inspections and throwing money at anything with a canal view. The city couldn't build fast enough. Real estate agents were minting six-figure commissions every month. Everyone thought the party would never end. It ended. Now Cape Coral holds a title nobody wanted: America's worst housing market. Prices down 11% from peak. Inventory quadrupled. 70% of homes selling below asking. And here's the part that should terrify anyone holding property in South Florida. 15% of recent buyers are underwater, trapped in homes worth less than they owe. But here's what nobody saw coming. The collapse wasn't triggered by a recession or a banking crisis. It was insurance, climate risk, and a mass exodus of investors realizing they'd been sold a lie. Between May 2020 and mid-2022, over 40,000 people moved to Lee County. The migration was relentless. License offices couldn't keep up with out-of-state plate swaps. Over 12,000 New Yorkers alone made the move in 2021, with Illinois and Ohio close behind. Remote work had untethered an entire generation of high earners from their office cubicles, and Cape Coral's palm-lined canals became the escape hatch. They bought without visiting, closed in cash, waived inspections. The typical buyer put down 3.5% and counted on endless appreciation to cover the risk. Redfin data showed cash buyers making up 38% of all transactions during the peak months, nearly double the national average. Institutional investors and short-term rental operators snapped up entire neighborhoods, converting family homes into Airbnb empires overnight. In some blocks, 70% of homes shifted to out-of-state LLCs in under 18 months. For locals who'd lived there for decades, the transformation was jarring. Streets went silent. The only signs of life were cleaning crews and property managers rotating between vacation rentals. The new arrivals brought money and energy, but also something dangerous: impermanence. Most saw Cape Coral as an investment vehicle, a tax shelter, a temporary escape, not a home. And the victims? They never stood a chance. Cape Coral's home values didn't just rise, they launched into orbit. The median sale price rocketed from $239,000 in May 2020 to $441,000 by mid-2022. 75% growth in 24 months. That's the kind of surge that obliterates affordability, locks out locals, and plants the seeds of its own destruction. By summer 2022, the typical home was selling for 70% above its long-term fundamental value. Analysts at CoreLogic and Moody's flagged it as one of the most overvalued metros in the country. For context, a market is considered dangerously overheated at 20% above trend. Cape Coral had tripled that warning line. Behind the numbers was leverage, mountains of it. Nearly half of buyers between 2021 and 2022 borrowed at or above 90% loan to value. Adjustable rate mortgages reappeared. Interest-only loans made a comeback. The same toxic products that fueled the 2008 crash were back, dressed up in new packaging and sold to buyers who'd never lived through a housing crisis. One local agent told a reporter, "We all knew it couldn't last, but nobody wanted to miss out." Price-to-income ratios hit record highs. Price-to-rent ratios went parabolic. Appraisers struggled to justify valuations that had detached from every economic fundamental. A house that sold for $280 in early 2020 was relisted for $500 just 2 years later. Same house, same condition. Nothing changed except the sign in the yard. The paradise they'd chased for tax breaks now came with a tax bill they couldn't escape. The numbers were about to get even uglier. By May 2025, the median home price in Cape Coral had fallen to $361,000, down 7.7% year over year and 11% from peak. That's an $80,000 wipeout for anyone who bought at the top. For buyers who stretched with minimal down payments, that loss didn't just sting, it buried them. Inventory exploded. In 2021, fewer than 800 homes sat on the market at any given time. By spring 2025, that number had ballooned past 3,000. The city's for sale signs now outnumbered open house visitors. Entire neighborhoods built during the pandemic boom sat quiet. Rows of identical houses competing for a shrinking pool of buyers willing to take the risk. Days on market tripled. Homes that used to disappear in a weekend now lingered for 75 days or more. Sellers who once fielded multiple offers above asking were now bracing for weeks of silence, followed by lowball bids and demands for closing cost credits. Nearly 70% of sales were closing below the original list price. The urgency had vanished. Buyers had leverage again, but only if they could stomach skyrocketing insurance costs and the growing sense that prices still had further to fall. Meet Jake, a 29-year-old remote worker from Chicago who bought his Cape Coral home in January 2022. He'd never set foot in Florida before closing day. The 3-bedroom single family seemed like a no-brainer. Low taxes, warm weather, a backyard pool. He put down 3.5% on an FHA loan and moved in 2 weeks later. Today, Jake's mortgage balance is $30,000 higher than his home's current value. Every month, the payment feels heavier. His insurance premium has doubled. Listing the property isn't an option. He'd need to write a check for $40,000 just to walk away. So he waits, scrolling through Zillow, watching comparable homes in his neighborhood drop another 5, 10, 15,000. He's trapped. That's when the insurance bomb dropped. Since Hurricane Ian tore through southwest Florida in 2022, 6 major carriers have either failed or fled the state entirely. Tens of thousands of homeowners were forced into Citizens Property Insurance, Florida's insurer of last resort. In the hardest hit zip codes, Citizens now covers more than 65% of policies. That safety net comes with a brutal price tag. Premiums that average $1,600 to $1,800 before the storm have surged past $6,000. In coastal neighborhoods, annual bills of $7,000 are common. Some homeowners have seen increases of 180% in a single renewal cycle. One Cape Coral resident watched her premium jump from $2,900 to $6,600 overnight. Another lost private coverage entirely and was force-placed into a policy costing $5,500, nearly quadruple her original rate. For buyers, insurance is no longer an afterthought. It's often 30% or more of the total monthly housing payment. Flood insurance, once a checkbox on the closing documents, has become a deal breaker. FEMA's new risk rating 2.0 system pushed average flood premiums from $800 to over $1,400 in newly mapped high-risk zones. Many homeowners, unable to afford the new rates, are rolling the dice by going uninsured. That gamble leaves lenders uneasy and buyers terrified. Appraisers now factor true cost of coverage into valuations, shrinking what buyers can afford and pushing more homes underwater. The insurance crisis isn't just a budget headache. It's a fixed cost that locks in losses and drives down property values. For sellers, a high insurance quote can kill a deal overnight. For buyers, the unpredictability of next year's bill is a risk many are no longer willing to take. Turns out, sunshine and swamps don't mix, especially when insurers do the math. The frenzy was about to hit a wall nobody saw. For thousands of Cape Coral homeowners, the math had become impossible, and walking away was the only option left. Meet Sarah and Tom, the New Jersey retirees who'd bet everything on paradise. Sarah and Tom sold their home in Bergen County in late 2021 and moved south with dreams of golf, sun, and a quiet retirement. They paid $500,000 for a 3-bedroom ranch style near the Caloosahatchee River. It felt like freedom. This spring, their home appraised at $390,000. Their insurance premium has doubled since Hurricane Ian, now $7,800 a year. Monthly costs are running hundreds more than their fixed income allows. They've started talking about moving back north, but selling would mean bringing tens of thousands to the closing table. Money they don't have, Tom spends his mornings refreshing Zillow, watching neighboring homes drop in price week after week. Sarah wonders if they should just stop paying and let the bank take it. They're not alone. Calls to local housing counselors about short sales, forbearance, and strategic default are climbing. The dream of a fresh start in Florida has become a financial quagmire with no exit. Everything they thought they knew about Florida real estate? Dead wrong. Estimates suggest 15 to 20% of pandemic-era buyers are now deeply underwater, especially those who bought with minimal down payments or in flood-prone neighborhoods. Many are absentee owners, untethered to the community, and increasingly willing to walk away if losses mount. But the real damage was still hidden. In March 2024, Cape Coral City Hall pulled the emergency brake. Officials halted all new building permits, citing urgent concerns about drainage and flood risk after repeated street flooding events. The freeze lasted nearly 2 months, stalling hundreds of construction projects and sparking heated battles between city officials and developers. When permits resumed, the rules had changed. Any home with more than $25,000 in storm damage now requires third-party engineering certification. Older homes in flood-prone zones face mandatory municipal electrical inspections. Roof integrity reports became required for renovation permits. Multifamily buildings over 25 years old must undergo annual recertification under a new ordinance introduced in April 2024. Between March and August 2024, inspection activity surged 41%. Dozens of permits were suspended. Nearly 100 recertification orders went out for older buildings. Homeowners and contractors suddenly faced longer wait times, higher upfront costs, and a maze of new compliance requirements. Compared to neighboring Lee County, Cape Coral's code enforcement now ranks among the toughest in Southwest Florida. For investors and traditional buyers alike, the new rules added another layer of cost and complexity to an already deteriorating market. The city's response made everything worse. The party was over, the hangover was just beginning. Investor-owned homes started flooding the market with discounts that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. iBuyers and large-scale landlords who'd bought in bulk at the height of the frenzy were now racing to unload. Deed records revealed many were accepting losses of 10 to 18% below acquisition cost. For a house bought at $500,000, that's a $50,000 to $90,000 shortfall before factoring in commissions, repairs, or holding costs. Behind the scenes, builders were sitting on 800 to 1,200 newly built homes, never officially listed on the MLS. Major developers like D.R. Horton and Lennar quietly offered incentives, $40,000 to $70,000 off original prices, or mortgage rate buydowns worth tens of thousands, all to move unsold inventory without slashing headline prices. One iBuyer spokesperson admitted on a quarterly earnings call, "We're prioritizing liquidity and clearing aged inventory, even if that means selling below acquisition cost." These fire sales rippled outward, resetting neighborhood comps and pressuring traditional sellers to follow suit. Nobody wanted to catch a falling knife. The supply shock wasn't just visible in public listings, it was lurking in the shadows, waiting to hit the market at the next sign of weakness. Meet the Rodriguez family from Illinois. They bought a Cape Coral property in late 2021 as an Airbnb investment, putting 10% down. The rental income they'd projected never materialized. Tourism softened, competition exploded, insurance and HOA fees soared. What was supposed to be a cash flow machine became a monthly drain. Their property sits vacant. They're now exploring legal options to surrender the home without filing for bankruptcy. The fire sales had already begun, but the collapse wasn't staying in Cape Coral. Broward and Palm Beach counties moved fast. In early 2025, both adopted stricter building codes for homes in high-risk flood zones, requiring 2-foot elevation buffers and mandatory flood insurance disclosures at closing. More than 18,000 parcels in Broward alone now face enhanced requirements, reshaping where and how new homes can be built. Lenders weren't waiting for the next crisis. Throughout South Florida, regional banks and national mortgage giants quietly raised down payment minimums by 5 to 10% for properties flagged as flood-prone or carrying elevated insurance costs. A buyer who once needed 5% down in Fort Lauderdale or West Palm Beach now faces a 10 or even 15% threshold. The insurance sector braced for turbulence. Reinsurers, the financial backbone for primary carriers, quoted 30 to 35% higher premiums for 2026 contracts across the state, citing Cape Coral's collapse as a warning sign. That cost surge is already filtering down to homeowners, with new policy quotes in Broward and Palm Beach reflecting the added risk. As these policies spread, the price of buying and owning a home in South Florida rises, and the pool of eligible buyers shrinks. The contagion was already spreading north. Behind every number was a family watching their future collapse. Cape Coral now stands as the warning flare for every Sunbelt boomtown chasing growth without a safety net. Its collapse didn't just reset prices or slow sales. It triggered a full-scale rethink of risk across South Florida. For the first time since the last financial crisis, a post-boom Florida county has seen both home values and market liquidity unravel so quickly that lenders, insurers, and regulators are rewriting their playbooks in real time. The chain reaction is clear. As Cape Coral's prices tumbled, neighboring counties raced to tighten floodplain rules. Lenders doubled down on down payment requirements. Insurers pushed through the steepest reinsurance hikes in decades. Each policy shift, from Broward's new elevation mandates to Palm Beach's closing disclosures, traces back to the same flashpoint, a city where the dream of Sunbelt prosperity collided with the hard limits of climate, capital, and confidence. National headlines now treat Cape Coral as the bellwether for every market that soared on migration and easy money. Out-of-state buyers, once the engine of Florida's growth, are pausing, reassessing, or pulling back altogether. Builders and investors who once set the pace are bracing for deeper scrutiny and slower exits. What began as a local correction has become a regional reset, with every new restriction, premium hike, or buyer hesitation echoing the same message. In today's market, the fallout from one city's collapse can redraw the map for an entire state. No one was coming to save them. What started in Cape Coral wasn't staying in Cape Coral. In May 2025, Cape Coral's median home price stood at $361,250, down 7.7% from the previous year and nearly $80,000 below its 2022 peak. Local inventories quadrupled. Over 15% of recent buyers slipped underwater. Insurance premiums soared to $5,000 to $7,000 annually, forcing more than half of all homeowners onto the state-backed Citizens Plan. The evidence leaves no doubt. Cape Coral's collapse has triggered stricter policies and lender requirements across South Florida. The full impact on property values and long-term recovery remains unclear, but what is certain, documented in county ordinances, builder disclosures, and insurance filings, is that this isn't over. Cape Coral was just the beginning. So which Florida city is next to collapse? Subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking chapter.